Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to another experience of Me and Paranormal You. This is your buddy, Ryan Singer. Happy to be joined once again by Darcy Staniforth. Thank you for jumping on the program again.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be back here and spend some time with you. We're going to chat about all kinds of things like we normally do.
Exactly. Killer background, by the way. Killer office situation happening at the homestead. Just a reminder, all of the episodes of Me and Paranormal You moving forward will be available on YouTube. If that's how you prefer to get your pods, go to youtube.com/official Ryan Singer and hit that subscribe button, as they say, as the kids say. We were talking about kid stuff a second ago when it comes to like TikTok and how I made myself embrace TikTok after years of resistance. And I was like, if I'm going to do TikTok, I'm going to have fun with it and do whatever the hell I want. You know, my girlfriend keeps going, you got to make them shorter so they can be reels on Instagram. I'm like, I want to do a 3-minute poem as this old cowboy. And so, and if people don't like that, people don't like it, I'll do shorter ones for them as well. But it's reinvigorated my love of writing poetry, which I haven't visited in years. So I've been having fun. So you're on the old TikTok as well.
I am on the TikTok. I haven't dropped as many videos, mainly because after. So the joy, you know, as I don't know, maybe if you've not experienced this yet, but I tend to respond because of American studies and things like that to people's like political stuff or when people are asking about things. And I got flagged like for hate speech recently, or like a while, not recently, but a couple months ago, because somebody had asked like, stitch this and tell us about something that you found really toxic about your religious upbringing. And so I talked about the idea of purity culture and the idea of like men saying to women like, oh, I want to guard your heart. But what I really call it is like Christian dibs, where like a guy will be like, well, I'm guarding her heart, but then it keeps another guy from doing anything. Just very not crazy inflammatory, not anything like that. But I grew up with very toxic purity Christian culture, flagged for hate speech. And I was like,
Wow.
are you serious? Like, this is nuts. So, and if you get too many violations, they can like take away your account. And I'm like, I'm just trying to have fun. So for most of it, I have been just being, you know, watching and scrolling and, you know, curating my For You page, which, as I'm sure you know, gets real interesting sometimes.
Indeed it does. And the Black Lodge is always watching.
Oh, always. And,
you know,
and it's like, oh, how did that? Okay. But then I took folks on a tiny historical tour of where I lived the other day.
I saw that with the friend's photo.
We've been walking by that, and it's like, because normally in those like glass cases, they'll put like, oh, vintage flea markets coming into town or like sports stuff. But that friend's photo's been there for weeks, and I don't know why. So it's like, the historic Friends photo of Old Town Tustin.
$200,000 piece of memorabilia right there.
Yeah, and it's so just like, why is this here? And I just thought it was really lovely. And it's like, there's other cool things that I would like to, as I'm doing more historical stuff, probably take videos of. Like in the parking lot, like right next door to that, there is a mini church that is a mini as in like 6 people can sit in it, of a church from Tennessee that somebody just decided to build in this parking lot. And it's like sometimes open for you to go in there, and just, it's the most random, like, who, and then there's like, you know, a Japanese restaurant and like a dance studio and all this, but in the middle of that parking lot is a tiny church. It's so weird.
Yeah, you just never know. I'm gonna go get some milk, cigarettes, and some Jesus real quick. I'll be back.
Just gotta visit the tiny church real quick. Gotta get in a little Jesus. Just not all the Jesus, just a little bit.
A drive-through. They should put a drive-through window in.
Yeah, and the weird thing about, outside of the fact that it's a tiny church in a parking lot, is that like the pews, very traditional pews. It's a very traditional looking, church. And but the lectern, the pulpit lectern is like, looks like it's made of rock. So like, like Rock of Ages, but it doesn't really fit in with the rest of the church. So I'm just like, somebody was like, this is where the power comes from. Like, I don't know what the stylistic choice was on that. But I'll now that I've talked about it on here, I'll go in and I've taken some photos, I'll take some more and post them so listeners can check out the tiny church in the middle of the Jamestown Center parking lot. Like, so
what's the handle?
my Instagram is at Darcy Staniforth.
And it's the same thing on TikTok.
Oh yeah, I think I might be. I think it is Darcy Staniforth.
Oh,
but I think you went. Now let me look. Hopefully it will not.
Well, while you're looking that up, let me inform people listening and or watching, or both, or I guess. I think I already said that when I said and or. But today I just watched this. Probably a few days back. You gave the TEDx talk in October of last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And you gave a TED talk on death, grief, and the college student. And what a great talk.
Thank you.
And it's one of these things where I was reading this book from an old friend of mine who's a comic named Michael Malone. And it's called Dead Serious. And it's kind of a memoir. It's got parts of his journal in there, but it mostly talks about the loss of his parents, his grandparents, all the death in his life and how he's handled it. And he talks about grief in the book a little bit. And I'm reading that. I watched this and I'm just like, oh, wow. I never considered the grief component as being, separate from some of these other things, right? Like there, and not to mention the protocols in place to allow a person to grieve that are, for the most part, non-existent. And when they do exist, especially for a college student, it's laughable that, okay, you get 5 days to get over the death of the most important person in your life, and then we need you back, right? And I understand that life goes on, and to honor the dead, we must try to live our best lives in their honor, right? Ideally, I should say that. But the idea of the grieving process being, separate from the death itself and the loss of just whatever else comes along with that, whether it's the stability of the only person left in your family, or whether it's even, a friend, a classmate that was very close to you, that maybe was the one person you relied on. And now they're gone. And you get sometimes no time whatsoever to remove yourself from your quote unquote educational responsibilities or even your work responsibilities. And the big issue for me was that you really touched on was our society, the hidden death, right? And we hide from it, and we hide it from us. And I've got a friend of mine who just lost her mother, and it's one of these things where we work together in a large capacity, and it's just like, you let me know kind of thing. And it's, there are certain things that are more important in life. I hope we all can realize that. But what a great talk.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was. So for those of you who might not know how the TEDx process works, you have to fill out an application and go through audition. Like, it's a pretty heavy duty process. And so I had and you submit on your application a couple of ideas. And the other idea I'd thought about talking about, because it's something that I put into practice a lot, is using people's names. Like when you're out at restaurants and you're talking to cashiers and you're talking to because it acknowledges our humanness, right? So we talked kind of about the importance of that and just kind of returning dignity to people in really simple ways. And then I was mentioning also death, grief, and the college student. And the committee was like, I think that's the one we want you to go with. I was like, great. And so I began, you then outline, present to them. If they like it, you go to another round. Like you go through a few rounds of actual like speaker auditions. And for me, I had my own experiences, which I talk about in the talk, of loss of family during my educational journey. But also I've sat with so many students in my non-paranormal work, and sat with coworkers and friends and all these things. And really where my desire to help people like my desire to be death positive and help people with grief, which is really what this has come into, really a lot came after my dad had passed. Because like when my grandmother passed when I was 19, I processed it in a really different way. I think because I was 19 and, I'm in college, I'm rowing, I'm doing speech and debate, I'm doing theater. Like I was super sad, but it wasn't the same thing as when my father passed, because I was really involved with my father's end of life care. He had hospice at home, which I really believe that we should all have, to the best of our ability, the most choices that we can have in our end of life decisions. I'm a huge proponent of the Death with Dignity Act. So California, where we both live, happens to have death with dignity, which is nice. Many other states are pushing for it, and other states also have it in place. And that is basically where people have the choice if things are getting really bad. And it's a real difference between death with dignity is not suicide. It's not this, it's not a move out of selfishness or escape in the same way suicide can be viewed. It is, there's a great documentary called How to Die in Oregon. And one of the women in there talks about how she's like, this isn't suicide. I would love to stay here and be with my family and be with my husband and continue on my life. My body has made other choices. And she was dying of a internal, I believe it was stomach cancer. And so, she had gotten to this, she had set a date. She thought if it was going to be that bad at that date that she would do it. And then she ended up not being bad and continued on for many more months until things got really bad, because she didn't want to put her family through those things. She didn't want to linger in those ways, right? Because we deal with a lot of medicalization of death. So I really believe in people's choices in that. But after my dad passed in 2013, me and my mother and I grieved very differently. And it's not good, bad, or indifferent. It was just like she was dealing with it one way and I was dealing with it another. And so like the week after he passed, I was at the house all the time, helping her and being strong for her. And then I'd go home at night and I would cry and I would grieve. And I literally, at that time, I wasn't working in higher ed at the time. I was a manager, and I took a week off and then came back to work. And because I was back at work, it was this assumption that like things were kind of fine. And we had my dad's celebration of life, about a month after he passed. But even leading up to that, it was just kind of like I had the weekend off for that, right? To have these people at my parents' house and to have to eulogize my father, which even to this day, could not tell you what I said, Ryan. Like, have an idea, but like people loved my dad. My dad could be a shit sometimes, for sure. But at the same time, he was a jovial, welcoming person who gave to other people and lived a life of service. And people told amazing stories and showed up and were so happy to be there in the way to celebrate him. Not happy he was gone. You would have thought my dad was a riot. He would have loved you. Like, I just, there's some people are like, oh, you and Alan would have gotten along, right? We were talking about Tenny before we come on here. When I see him, I'm like, Dad would have been like into this kind of stuff. The paranormal work, he would have been so excited about it. But it was a lot of, oh, it's done. Oh, it's all tied up in a bow, right? You've come back to work, the grief, you must be at a better place. Oh, the ceremony is done. It's all tied up in a bow and it's like put on a shelf, or like it's over. And it wasn't. It was my dad. And I just started to find more and more through other experiences, through some awful experiences, like probably, that first week after I was back, I ran into a woman from a faith community I had belonged to. And I was managing a very large coffee house at that time. And she encounters me and was like, oh, did I see that your parent has passed? And I said, yes, thank you so much. And she was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And that is where she should have stopped. She could have, right? Oh, I'm so sorry. Or whatever, just stop. That is not where she stopped.
Okay.
So then she says, well, was your dad a believer?
Oh God.
And my response, because again, when I'm at work, we're having an interaction over taking her order. And what I'm not going to tell a woman I don't know, and I share this part of my dad's story because I want other people to be able to bring light to these things. My dad, when he was a kid, growing up in the Church of England, because my dad was born and raised in Sheffield, England, my dad suffered horrible sexual abuse at the hands of the priests. And he, being an older generation, it wasn't this therapy like we didn't talk about the things like we did. And he suffered for that for a long time, for his whole life. And my dad could not be in a church if there was robes involved, no robes, could not be in a church with a Corpus Christi on the wall, like so activating for him. So, and I use the word activating instead of triggering because I work with folks that have experienced gun violence. So that's why you'll hear me say activating, so activating for him. Could not do it. And I honored that and I respected that, because why would I ever want to do injury to anyone who I loved? Would never want to do that. But again, I'm not going to tell all this to a woman who I'm taking a coffee order. That's all I'm doing. To which I said, because my dad was very spiritual, his belief was not that he was going to heaven. His belief was that he was going on his next big journey, is what he would call it. I'm going on my big journey. I'm going on my adventure. And so I mirrored that language because that was his belief language. And my dad would tell you all the time that he talked to God, and him and God talked all the time. But he would also tell you about friends of his that had passed on that he had deals with, that they would come visit him and that they had. And my dad and I made that deal with one another as he was getting sick. Like I said, you're going to come visit me, right? He was like, yeah, I can keep that into the deal. So like, we talked about those kinds of things. But again, I'm not telling this over the cashiering. So I say, but I want to give you all that background. I just say, I think my dad and God had it worked out, because what that woman had done is question whether or not my father was burning in hell.
Exactly. And
right.
That is, I mean,
right?
there's no real words. I'm stunned.
Yeah. And when I said that to her, she's like, I guess God can work with that too.
That's what her response was, which I guess could have been a lot worse.
Could have been, but it was already like, I finished my interaction with her and I went to the back because I started having a panic attack. And I said to my assistant manager at the time, I was like, I'm going to lunch. He's like, are you okay? I'm like, I am not. I'm going to go to lunch. And I went to a local little Vietnamese restaurant and I just sat in the corner and tried to calm myself down because I was so how could someone question if my father's in hell? Like, I'm in the worst pain, some of the worst pain of my life. And I promised myself that day that regardless of my belief system, I would work to not do violence to people's situations. Does that mean I don't misstep sometimes? No, doesn't mean I don't misstep, because I do. But I also found for myself, I would have much rather had people reach out and try and say, hey, like, how are you? Can I just show up with food? Whatever those things were and are. And then be like, hey, I don't need that right now. That's fine. Because what that really is, of them saying not what I need right now, or that would be great, is trying to focus on them and their grief. Because it's not about me. And I think it's another thing that we see a lot in grief, is where suddenly people turn it into like, somehow they try and make it about them, which is so weird. And this is why with people that are in really deep grief, we have to be very careful about saying like, well, tell me what you need. And it's like, when you're in the middle of it, it's like, I don't know what I need. So just like make a move. Like if you could just drop food at my house, put snacks on my door, like whatever it is. Right. But really working to try and to learn and continue to learn different belief systems. So then academically, as I'm, finishing my degree as an adult returning student, I started moving towards death, dying, and grief, and trying to learn as much as I could. Because one of the ways that I deal with things I don't understand but that are really affecting me, is like, I want to get as much information as I can, because I trust that it's going to help me, and then it's going to help other people. And the synchronicities, the door openings, the conversations I have had with people just by saying, I do work around death, dying, and grief, I think for a lot of people is a freedom, because we don't talk about it. We don't allow people that space, because it's an uncomfortable space, because one, maybe we come from a death avoidant. I mean, we're a death avoidant culture in the first place. But I know some folks who it might even be your own family that is like, oh, we don't talk about those things. Or like, have you heard like so-and-so has cancer? Like they say it quiet as if that will somehow take it away. And that's just not the reality of it. And so I have, like I said, I've sat with students where it's not even like, what's going on? Like, I don't ever try to be that kind of person, but looking at like the student I talk about in the TED Talk, whose father passed from the really terrible accident, I simply asked like, so what's going on with the grades? It was a simple, what's been going on? Like, how is life going? And then tells me this horrific story where I'm just sitting there going, but then looking at the grades of the semester it happened, and I'm going, oh, you still finished with A's and B's. But then the semester after, all of that grief kicks in, because he had been able to kind of stave it off. And that's the thing too, is like, sometimes, as you were saying, Ryan, we have a chance to deal with it in the moment or in the time it's happening. And other times we don't, but it'll come up. We can only push it down for so long, because it's someone that we loved. And it doesn't just have to be family. It could be a parent, a friend, a mentor, a professor, someone you're dating, like there are these spaces of what is acceptable and not acceptable, as far as like who, oh, well, they have more meaning in this way or that way. And for a lot of us, if we've grown up with challenging families, chosen family is sometimes much more important to us than our own family. Or when I talk about the idea of family privilege, right? I work with foster youth, and in a lot of my work, they don't have family privilege. They don't necessarily have that. So their support systems look very different and don't meet those definitions for a lot of the bereavement time.
Yeah, it's so complex. And the fact that, one can dedicate, a large portion of their life to, reading about it, researching, investigating, and trying to better understand it is evidence of that. And on top of all of that, it feels like, and I've seen this happen in the past, when someone is publicly grieving, people don't want it. People
Not at all.
are
Yeah.
like, you need to shut your mouth for fill in the blank. You didn't know him that long, or she wasn't that big part of your life, or it was just, your pet, or think we don't like, not only are we death avoidant, we're also don't bring your grief into my purview. I don't want to see grief, because maybe it makes me truly understand that, like, oh, grief is real and it's death. But on the other hand, people will approach a relative stranger at a coffee shop where they work and then try to drop some afterlife talk. They'll talk afterlife all day long, skipping over the grieving and the death, the actual death part, which is odd to me.
Well, and I think you bring up a couple different things in what you're saying. So one, there's what I call the grief Olympics, which is the I'm grieving, but my grief is much more warranted than your grieving, or this grieving or that grieving, right? And so for example, I won't name any names, but last year I lost an older friend from the comedy scene, as in far as like not age, but like have known for a long time. And we had not been directly in each other's lives in a long time, but it's still like part of my life. And I'm still very sad that this person was gone. And at their memorial, there were some people that, there was amazing people and amazing stories got told and amazing things happened. But then there were some people who had issues with other people who were at that memorial, who just were being like shitty about it at the memorial. Two people who are like deep in this grief. It's like, I get that you're having a hard time with this, but like, this is not the time or place, right?
Wow, no, not at all.
Not at all, right? And like we've been dealing with this pandemic now for going on 2 years. And when, over 2 years now, when you've got mass loss, like we've experienced with COVID, right? And people aren't just grieving people with COVID. We've been grieving the loss of community. We've been grieving the loss of connections, of normal rituals, of being able to perform, of being able to travel, of being able to have graduations and proms and things like that. Things that people sometimes can really flippantly be like, oh, big deal. But those are rites of passage, or those are routines, or those things that we enjoy. And so we do grieve in those ways as well, because it's not just about grieving in death. There's a lot of different forms of grief. But when you lose people on such a massive scale, then people also get really dismissive of like, oh, well, everybody's grieving right now. And it's like, okay, but that doesn't make my grief any less meaningful to me. Doesn't need to mean anything to you, but it doesn't make it any less meaningful to me in this time, in this space. And, because people are still dying of non-COVID related things. Like people are still dying of old age. We just lost Louis Anderson to blood cancer. Like people are still dying. I know other folks that have lost family and friends during this time, not to COVID, right? And so then people get into weird, like what I call like grief, like I said, grief Olympics. Then let's talk about the afterlife all day long, right? But we don't talk about the death part. And we even see this, I think, in the paranormal community too, because ghosts, hauntings, what could this be? Why are they still here? What's all this? But it's like, can we talk about, like, we're talking about death still. We're talking about, but we don't want to talk about the death part. So we talk about this part over here with the ghosts and the hauntings, but even, heaven, Valhalla, whatever it is, right? And it is one of the, and I've said this before when people have talked to me about this, I think Christianity is one of the most death and grief avoidant faiths out there. Christianity, Catholicism. Here's why. And again, I grew up very much in this faith community. So it's not like I'm just like, oh, I'm the angriest atheist. Like, that's not me.
Well, you do know that we just got picked up, this podcast just got picked up on the Jerry Falwell podcast network. So
oh, shit.
Tread lightly on this water that you're walking on.
If that's when I know that you're like, I'm really giving into the hustle. You're like, you know what? Why not? Let's just do it.
You know what? Will allow me to buy a house in Southern Ohio. Okay.
Okay. Right. So you think about Christianity in regards to, let's talk about the story of Easter, right? Christ is persecuted. He is crucified. He dies on Good Friday. And then 3 days later, he rises from the dead and everything is good. And he ascends. He goes on to a better place. Okay. It's like the basis of that simplified story. And granted, in the actual time for the disciples, when Jesus is crucified, they're not like, oh, he's going to show back up. He's dead. We're grieving. We're really sad. But then he does show back a couple days later and everything. He rises on the third day. And if you are raised in that faith system, that is a message you hear at least once a year, if not more, if not you're reminded of it. And so then it's like, well, where does that leave me for my grief? Because you're just supposed to be like, oh, well, it's going to be fine. They're moved on to this better place, right? And there's not really space, like in a weird way, it creates a narrative of you're supposed to kind of get over this grief by getting closer and closer to God. And I'm not saying that faith can't help folks in their time of grief, because I know that it can. But when somebody talks about losing someone, and then you say, well, they're in a better place. What you're also saying to them is that being with you was not a better place. That being out of your presence, being out of your life is actually the better place. So people don't think about it in that way, right? And I feel like a lot of people in faith communities, pastors, priests, and I've heard some tales from friends where I'm like, they said what to you? You know, a lot of they're like, well, it's God's plan. This was God's plan. My sister dying in a terrible accident was God's plan, because one day he just went that, like, instead of, and again, it's because of that uncomfortability. I just want to placate it, and I just want to try and give them kind of hope, when really sometimes people just need to feel seen and heard in that. And this is hard, and I miss them, and this has changed my world forever. I use the analogy from True Detective season 2 with Vince Vaughn a lot, but it makes sense. Is that there's, for those of you who've not seen season 2 of True Detective, Vince Vaughn's character does some horrible things to people in that season, but like, he's sitting talking with this kid about the loss of his dad. And he's basically talking about the idea of like these breaks that happen. And when these breaks happen in our lives, it's like everything that happened before, and then there's everything that happens after. And that's where, when we lose somebody, these breaks happen, right? All of these breaks happen. And so it's like, I in my brain, right, especially around my dad's death, I think in those kind of timelines, like, oh, that was before June 24th, 2013, there's everything before that. And then there's everything since that, right? I think about it in regards to, because in the Tedx talk, I would love any of you to watch it if you're interested, and you can always feel free to reach out. But I talk about my miscarriage. And it's really the first time I've publicly talked about my miscarriage, because that was that wasn't really part of the talk at first. And then I was talking with some friends in my D&D group because, nerds help nerds out.
D&D groups are notorious for the deeply personal, intimate bonds.
Right, exactly. And so I had shared with them a rough draft of the talk, and they were like, we really like this part, and we like the beginning, we like all the content, but I feel like the at the end, like I was originally had kind of a very like, wrap it up, here's like how we can help ending. And they were like, it's fine, but I think you need to bring it back to the personal. And so that's what I did. But I think about the timing of that. I see pictures that I know, like it's very weird to look at a picture and know like, oh, I was pregnant in that picture. And then a picture not too long after that and go, oh, I'm not pregnant in that picture. And that I think is sometimes how our brains start to like work in that, right? And getting through your year of first holidays without people, first birthdays without people, first major life events without people. And when you're thinking about like the grief doesn't ever stop. It's never gone. People go like, oh, you'll be done with your grief. I've heard that. I'm like, will ya? Because that person's always still going to be gone. And it's not ever just done. It's just, you learn to mitigate it better. You learn to manage it better. Right. And so when we are grieving, going back to what you were saying about people don't want to see it, there's this real weird timeline people put on. And even some therapists have put on timelines. Like if you're still grieving after 6 months in a really severe way, they refer to it then as complex grief, because you're not moving as fast as you need to be. You're not like, it has this, again, set of unspoken rules that nobody talks to us about. And then you're supposed to just be like, oh, you need to be better. You need to move on. And it's like, how can I move on? Because while you're complaining that you didn't get the parking spot at the grocery store, I'm sitting in here going like, do you not understand where I'm at right now? And it makes people uncomfortable because one, I think it makes a lot of folks who want to think they live forever realize their mortality. And two, I think when people really grieve, truly grieve, whether that is like that deep body racking sobs, whether that is incredibly dark humor, which is part of how I get through a lot of things. Us comedy folks tend to do that. Whether it is, traveling, not work, whatever that is, I think there's also a jealousy that comes for people in not having that freedom in their own life. And if when they were grieving, they didn't have the ability to do that, it's like, oh, how come they got that and I didn't?
Yeah, like it almost has a sense of being unfair.
Yeah.
And I was robbed of my opportunity to do this because society wasn't accepting it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think most people can relate to that sentiment in some way or the other, not necessarily grief even. But what are we doing here? Are we trying to get better, or do we want everybody to not be allowed to do the shit I wasn't allowed, even though we should have been allowed to do it back when I was not allowed to do it? Yeah, it is. Oh man. I mean, part of me gets it. There is, you were mentioning earlier about making someone else's death about me, right? The people who do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the pushback that we see against public grieving might border on some of that happening, maybe. And people are just like, how are you making this about you right now? They see it as opportunistic.
Sure.
And I think that's just a symptom of being inside of a world of a world that really rewards the selfish. And so why would they not behave in this way? This is the way you have to behave to succeed in the United States of America, right?
Right.
Because for a lot of people, they believe that. And I was at a funeral late last year, someone I didn't know, but I was there with, someone who, my partner. And at the end, it was just kind of a nice little service. It wasn't even a funeral. And this woman that no one knew stood up, started talking. And then she didn't really stop talking. And she didn't say anything really about the person we were all there to honor the life of. It was more their story. And after a while, people start shuffling in their seats like, what the hell is happening right now? Is this real? And eventually it's over. It stops. I think there was almost even someone who kind of jumped in at a pause to kind of be like, well, and thank you. And,
they just hooked her off.
But it was really one of those moments where you're wondering, like, where's the disconnect here when it comes to the setting we're in and all that. But at the same time, no one stood up and said, hey, shut the hell up. Right? No one did that. And because there was still at least this group of people that had assembled on this special day had the restraint to be like, I don't know what's going on either, and I don't particularly think it's appropriate, but I'm not going to be the person who turns this into a whole nother thing, which you were kind of referencing previously about people getting into it or whatever. And it's like, I'm going to do a better job of honoring this person's memory by sitting through this as long as it takes.
Oh yeah. And I think sometimes too, I think we've all seen this to some level where somebody starts talking and you're like, I don't know where this is going, but like, maybe if I give it like maybe they'll get there, and then sometimes they just don't ever get there. Right. But again, that idea of like, let's not make this, like, let's not turn a memorial or a celebration or a funeral or, whatever that ritual is, into something bigger. It was like, and then a fight broke out, and then people are arguing. And then, because I feel, and I've said this for a long time, I feel like weddings and funerals, memorial services, are where you see some of the most extreme forms of human emotion ever, right? Because we've all been to the wedding where there's like a mother of a bride or a bridesmaid or somebody who suddenly is just like, this is actually my day. This is my day. And you're like, I don't think it is your day. I think it's their day, not your day. But it happens on the other end as well. And, we have a very deep need as humans to be seen, heard, and know that our stories are important.
And I think that's really important, because for me, the reason that whole situation unfolded that I kind of detailed vaguely, this person, in my opinion, hadn't been heard in a while.
Yeah.
And they needed that. And I would much rather err on the side of, let's open up grieving to everybody, and let's open it up publicly so people can grieve. And with that opening up of this whole new segment of the amusement park or whatever, right? This game of life, there's going to be the elevator drop every once in a while, right? That's a little too extreme for me. I'm not going to go there, and that's not my bag. But I would rather live with that being a part of the new reality, as opposed to going back to where we don't grieve at all. Nobody grieves. Nobody talks about death. Nobody talks about loss. Nothing.
Sure. And I think so, talking about that idea earlier of wrapping, the ritual part being like the wrapping up and putting it on the shelf. I think sometimes we see something like that elevator drop, that, Guardians of the Galaxy at Disneyland, like, whoosh, like, oh my gosh, because folks think that this is going to only be their only space to grieve this person, right? Because maybe the rituals they have in their own lives are very set up, right? Like, this is how you do this. This is how you not do this, because that is the amount that they were taught. And I don't think that we do enough thinking outside the box about grieving. And I'm not trying to sound corporate, like, oh, we got to think outside the box, but I think we have to think outside the box when it comes to grieving.
We got to rebrand grieving.
Let's rebrand grieving.
Let's spitball.
I got a word cloud going. We're going to use the words they'll come up bigger as people are doing that. Mm-hmm. Yep. God, I just all of a sudden, like, the death community is like, you're not with us anymore. You're
okay.
But
now you lost me.
Now we're out.
Yeah.
But like for myself, so after this is a little more personal, but you and I talk about these things sometimes, and I don't mind sharing with listeners because maybe this will help somebody. So my miscarriage, I talk about a little bit in the talk, happened towards the end of my grad program. But work-wise, I had been having a lot of other medical tests and stuff run earlier in that year. And so I didn't have a lot of sick time. So when miscarriage happened, I didn't know what our campus's bereavement policy was at the time. And I didn't know that I would only get I didn't know I could have 5 days. Like, I could have taken the following week off. And so I only had 1 day of sick day. And so I went to the hospital on a Thursday. I then took Friday off, had the weekend, came back because I didn't know I had that. And unfortunately had a director at that time that was not up on that and couldn't pull me aside. And because I wasn't really sharing with a bunch of people, no one like took me aside and said, hey, maybe you shouldn't be here right now. You should be taking this time. And then a lot of other life happened right after that, like in quick succession. And so my grief had to be put really on the back burner. And then come May the following year, it was bubbling up, and I was just I was not in a good space. I really wasn't. And so I ended up having a talk with my director, and I was able to get that time of grief. She worked it out. It's not something that they would normally do, kind of almost like retroactive bereavement. But they worked it out that I was able to take this time, which was really, really helpful and was really needed, because I could just in that time just be. I could cry, I could process. And one of the things that we ended up doing is that in our we have a very small front yard, but there's like kind of this little grassy area, and we ended up putting together like a memorial garden with succulents and crystals, and there's a little Buddha in the center that's holding a succulent. And we picked plants because we had some other losses, but we picked plants and stones that we felt like honored those people. So it's in a sense like a little memorial garden. And
that's a beautiful idea.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was like, I think this might be good. Like, it was just something I was thinking about, and we decided together that's what it would be. And so when I'm in the front yard, I talk to them, right? I talk to the ones that are honored there, because that's kind of my space to do that. I have an altar in my house, and I do ancestral work there, and other like ritual work there, magic work and things like that. And that is where different aspects of people that have passed that I love, and also animals, are there. And so when I'm in that space, I talk with them. I talk out loud with them. I will say hello. After this past year in 2021, we unfortunately lost our amazing pit bull Rose, who was 14 years old and just the sweetest, most empathetic hippo of a dog. She was such a love. And like on the altar, I have her collar and I have a photo of her. And I have a beautiful incense and geode that our good friend Renee sent me, that she was doing some work around that during that time. And then another friend had sent a wind chime to, whenever I hear the wind chime, to think of Rose. And so that wind chime hangs out front. And so whenever I hear it, I say, "Hi, Rose." I talk to her. Because
that's really nice.
I just think she's visiting. And those are things like for me, right? I talk to monarch butterflies whenever I see them, because the weekend that my dad was passing, I just had this moment, you said look for the signs earlier, and I had this moment where I was standing in front of my parents' house and this monarch butterfly just came up really close to me. And this is literally the day before my dad transitioned, and it kind of got up close and then it went over the house. And I just had this feeling like that's dad. That's like the sign that dad's going. And so I associate monarch butterflies with my dad. And so whenever I see him out on a walk or a hike and I see a monarch butterfly, I'll say, "Oh, hi, Dad. It's great to see you." And they will sometimes just get really, really close, which maybe that's what monarch butterflies do. I hadn't had that experience before,
You didn't know
but it was like,
you didn't know that monarchs were notorious close talkers?
they're close talkers. They're like, "What's up? What's up? You enjoying me flying in your face? You
I'm a
really
butterfly.
like this? Aren't I beautiful? Look how
Yeah.
beautiful I am. Look at
Yeah.
my train. I'm amazing.
I mean,
I was a
moths,
caterpillar. Now look at me, right?
moths are so jealous of me.
They're
That
so
is-
jealous.
This is beautiful. The saying hello part is very touching, and it's making me go through my brain and be like, I might need something like this in my life as a monument or as some kind of reminder to speak out loud. I mean, because spoken words have real power, and and being who we are and believing that death and that consciousness moves on, and that the physical form is but a mere trapping for a moment, that certain religions might call it prayer, and I could even call it prayer if I wanted to. And I'm coming back into using that word, even though it's not in a religious sense, of traditional religion anyway. So, or assigned to a specific religion, I should say. But so the monarch butterfly just kind of like gets close to your face sometimes, and
Yeah.
no
And
matter
so
where you're at,
they
hello,
just
Dad.
are there. And like, I talk to them. Right. And so I think this is, I share these things because not that folks have to have the same rituals I do, but that they can think about however that looks for them is okay, right? Maybe it's a piece of jewelry, right? I found this great seller on Etsy that takes a person's handwriting and imprints it on silver or gold. And so I have my name written in my dad's handwriting. And so it's just a really neat thing, right? And it helps me like think of him and feel close to him in those ways. We just celebrated is not the right word. We just honored the 1-year passing of the friend whose memorial service I was mentioning earlier. And so that day, like, I put a little whiskey up on the altar. I put, a personal belonging of theirs on the altar. I lit candles and played music and just said, "Hey, like, a lot of people are thinking about you today. A lot of people love you and people really miss you still." And for me, it's like, again, we had not been super in one another's lives in the past number of years. But to me, I'm like, well, they're in a space where time doesn't matter anyways anymore. So what does it matter, you know? And
Yeah,
so
for
I
sure.
think about like these different things, like what is it that is honoring to what feels good to you, right? Is it playing certain songs? Is it mementos? Is it going to a place that you spent time with them at, right? Like I love cemeteries. I think cemeteries are really neat places to go visit, but in general, like really none of my family except my grandfather and great grandfather, I'm sorry, my grandfather, my great grandmother, and then my grandma in England, like the rest of my family is not in cemetery. So it's not like a time to go visit with them in there. And even those relatives, those ancestors, it's not like I feel close to them. So I think about being in spaces or being in things or acknowledging things that I know meant something or reflect them. Like my eyebrows this is like the Garrett side of my family. Like my aunt, my mom, we all have these eyebrows, but so did my grandfather. Like you see these beautiful pictures of him and he's got like these amazing eyebrows and this just wavy, great hair. Like you're just like, that is a classic looking dude. And so even sometimes I appreciate my eyebrows, like, yep, this is part of my legacy. This is part of these things. And so could be a garden, could be walks, it could be that kind of prayer or that talking time, right? Because if we were going to talk to God, the universe, and whatever, why not talk to that person on the other side? And it doesn't have to look the same. It doesn't have to be structured in a way, or if you had a structure put on it, doesn't mean you can't break out of that structure.
It could be a silly dance.
It could totally be a silly dance. And because, because like you think like, how many bits do we have with our friends? Like
I'm just going to put that out there now for everybody that after my physical form is, nothing more than a whisper in the wind on this beautiful egg that we're spinning on. Silly dances are how you'll get my attention.
I like it.
Silly dances. That's the idea that there can be no rules to the way we communicate with those that we loved, and that it doesn't mean that we're hung up on their death necessarily because we wish to keep communicating with them. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean we haven't gotten over their death, right? Which is such a weird kind of phrase, but we live in a pull yourself up by your bootstraps
sure
kind of town, don't we? And by town, I mean world. But there is this idea, in going on paranormal investigations, it's almost, I think strangely, it is, I think when people first start doing them, there's a little bit of awkwardness. Like, I'm just talking into I'm talking into this little radio that's going too fast, or like, what am I? And then the more you do it, the more comfortable you get, just kind of like speaking, trying to communicate to something that you cannot see. And so it should be an easy, I don't want to put that kind of qualifier on it, but it seems like a likely jump for anyone who's really interested in this to be able to incorporate this into their own life when it comes to communicating with the people that they miss so dearly and that they love so deeply.
Well, think about how much you talk to yourself.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's
right. Like
yeah.
I talk to myself all the time. I have interviews with myself. There's a whole audience, but like, so then there's also that jump, right? Of, oh, well, if I'm talking to myself, what about talking to this other person, right? To your point about paranormal investigation. Yeah, we do in a very, set space. We're trying to like get people to connect with us. And then it doesn't always occur to us to do that in this in real life. And I know sometimes like faith structures can cause issues for folks because it's like, well, I'm supposed to for example, I'm supposed to pray to God. Okay. but you could talk to other people too, right? And I think that there are things that I think there are things that show up that, to me, because of my experience and my lens on things, I go like, oh, that's like so and so just showed up, like they just showed up. And again, I don't need that to matter to anybody else, because it does my heart good, makes me feel like, oh, they're here, or I'm thinking about them right now, whatever, right? I know, and I've heard some folks talking about this lately in their own experiences, but one of the things that was can be really challenging after a loss is wanting to like have somebody come appear to you in dreams. And for a long time, my dad didn't show up for a while. But then when he did show up, at first he was still sick. He was still sick. And then eventually he wasn't sick anymore in the dreams. Sometimes I got like sweet 70s permed version of my dad, where I was just like, oh, this is amazing. But then I've gotten other times where I just see him, and sometimes still in the dreams, I'll be like, you're not like, I know you're not alive, but other times it's just that interaction, right? So he shows up in those ways. I've had other friends show up, or other people that have passed show up in dreams. When my grandmother passed, when I was 19, I had a dream not too long after she passed that she came and talked to me, and I asked her what her and Papa, my grandfather, were doing, because Papa had died when I was like 2. I was real young. But there's two stories with them. So when I was very young and about like 2 years old when he passed, all of the women on my mom's side of the family all kind of woke up at the same time, which is just super interesting to know, like, that they were all kind of like, oh, and then he was gone. When my grandmother, I'm going to jump around, but I love these stories. When my grandmother was getting close to the end of her life, my mom and my one aunt were taking care of her. And it was around, her birthday is in December. And my mom and aunt were over to be with her. And my aunt was like living with her. Actually, my aunt was living with her at the time. And my grandmother turned to my mom and my aunt and said, how did you get all of these people here? I haven't seen some of these people in so many years. And my grandmother went on to describe seeing dozens and dozens of people from her life that were appearing to her in this small apartment.
Wow.
Which was just like, I just learned that story recently. It gives me chills every time.
That sounds so rad.
It was so rad, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh. So having that, like, she's seeing that. And we hear that in end of life experiences, a lot of people saying that they're seeing people are coming to visit that have passed before them. My grandmother at the end, like towards the end, before she moved into, because she went to a hospice that was in a facility, I was with her one day and she wasn't feeling good. And she says, do you mind going? And I said, no, it's okay. And she goes, one day after this is all over, we'll spend time again. Which just in that, it gutted me. But then fast forward to this dream after she had passed, she came to visit me, she was telling me about her and Papa, and she told me that they had been going fishing. Like, yeah, Papa and I have been fishing. I'm like, okay. So I'm sitting with my mom and one of my other aunts, and I'm telling the story, and my other aunt just gets wide-eyed. I said, what's going on? And she says, I had the same dream. I had the same dream.
I love shared dreams.
Right? And so it's like, in those spaces, I feel like, okay, so we get freaked out because we don't know what's coming after, and then we have the loss and the grief. But like, those are the kinds of stories that also give me hope, like, hey, we're still moving on. And I believe that we still move on to different forms and get to go into this other space, right? Part of what my ritual stuff is as well, like I have a baby blue large candle from a local witch shop here in Orange County. And that's the candle that I use for, like, I light it to honor those who are like getting ready to pass or who have like just passed, because I want to acknowledge that. And it may not be people I know, but if we think about like intentions and, you know, what we put out there, it can be a nice, powerful thing to kind of think outside of ourselves of like, hey, I'm hoping and helping that person. But again, it can be like whatever you want. Talk to the world, do silly dances. Ryan Singer, silly dance claimed, right?
Yeah, it's really cool to think about all the different things that we can embrace to remember those that are no longer here with us. And I think you're right when it comes to believing in something else, something beyond, something further. It doesn't have to serve as a blinder to death and grief. It can offer hope, sure, or at the very least, it can offer. I mean, for me, it offers, I guess, curiosity and intrigue more than anything else.
Sure.
More than hope, I'd say, but not using it as the thing that prevents us from facing what we're experiencing in the moment and what's happening here. Because I mean, we only get a very short time here. We might as well do our best to enjoy and explore it. So I think it's all really cool. And I think this talk has been really great.
Thank you. I always enjoy sitting down with you.
And the TED Talk is great. I recommend, I'll link it in the show notes so people can just give a clicky click.
Thank you.
I've been doing that a lot lately, just putting Y's on the end of words. Like, this is the influence of who I live with. Like, I'm just like,
a little clicky click.
A little clicky click. I'm gonna have some foodie. I'm hungry. It's just like, oh my God, what's happening to me? But
to be fair though, I do that with people too. If I'm around folks long enough, I just start picking it up. And then other people are like, where did that come from? And I was like, I'm sorry. I absorb picking them all up. I absorb those things, accents, and that can get me in real trouble. And I don't mean to, but it's like, I'm not trying to mock anyone, but I'm just like, I think I'm just mirroring.
Well, yeah. And it's the sign of a very intelligent person who starts to mimic. That's what I think I heard somewhere, so I'm sticking to it.
Let's go with it.
That was nice how you did that. Well, Darcy, this has been great. I know we're going to have more to talk about in the future.
Absolutely.
There's always things that are swirling around the known and the unknown that we'll have to sit down and do some more discussions on. Is there anything else you want to plug upcoming or anything?
I mean, the TED Talk has been probably one of the biggest things. I'm working on some other projects now.
Congrats on that. I mean, it's not an understatement to say that not everybody in the world gives TED Talk.
No, they don't. And
so
I
well
cannot,
done. Well deserved.
I cannot tell
you,
Ryan, how much the comedian in me, when I finish this, really here's the talk, wanted to say, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and then leave, but I did not do that.
The first TED Talk mic drop.
Right, boom. But it's been one of those things that I've gotten some incredible feedback from. People have been very complimentary and also sharing their stories with me. And I am very grateful. It's 17 minutes, folks, but I try and deliver at every moment of that 17 minutes.
It's well done. It's well delivered. And for me, it offers hope to a future where these things you're discussing, specifically in it's a very educational specific for students. Students need this. And I'm hoping that people are paying attention, and I think they will be paying attention, and then start having these discussions and start, implementing some proper bereavement policies into their institutions. And, I mean, we all deserve it. And, because all of us will die. And, regardless of whether or not we figure out alchemy in time, we're going to die. It seems very likely. And we all deserve to be able to honor ourselves, our future self, and those around us in that way, I think. And so it's just, well done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So as I have other things that are coming up, I will keep you posted. There's a lot of, things afoot. They're just not out there yet, but
irons in the fire.
Irons in the fire.
Irons in the fire.
I would like a new cowboy poem called Irons in the Fire.
Trip Coltrane will get on that. Irons in the fire. It's like, what is it? Oh yeah, it's irons in the fire at a funeral pyre. It seems fitting for okay. I got some rhyme. I got one rhyme already. We're off and running. Well, Darcy, this has been great. Thanks again, and don't forget to hit that follow on the Instagram. And you found that, repeat the TikTok one more time. Do you remember it all?
So my TikTok is Miss Darcy Staniforth.
Can you spell that out? Is it MS or MISS?
MISSDARCYSTANIFORTH.
Okay, I didn't know if it was just the MS or the MISS.
Yeah, I think Darcy Staniforth was taken somehow, and I was like, how? So yeah, I'm much more active right now on Twitter and Instagram, but I'm trying to get the talks up. If I'm just not banned for hate speech. So
yeah. The Black Lodge lurks around every tweet.
Right. Like I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm just trying to have a good time. That's all.
Well, this was a good time. I appreciate it. And we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.
Another experience of me and Paranormal U. Don't forget that Crystallize app is now available for download in the Android, the Google Play, and the Apple app stores. So please download the app. It's free. You get 33 free snaps per month. You get 33 total free collection items in your crystal collection. But if you want to upgrade to the premium, you can do that for $3.99 a month or $19.99 for the year. That gives you unlimited snaps, unlimited collection. We are diligently working on 200 more crystals to be added to the identification database. We're excited about that. We've got approximately 100 crystals it can identify now. We've got daily content. We've got info and ethical sourcing. We got all kinds of stuff. I mean, check out your database. You know what I mean? You don't remember what your crystal is or what it does, use the app. You know what I mean? We got a great database curated by the psychic teachers that we're very excited about providing you free of charge. No ads, no free trial. Just get in there and do it. If you're a Kickstarter backer, if you participated in the Crystal Bounty, or if you are on our waiting list, you'll be getting your free access activated either today or tomorrow. It's happening this week, okay? So we're rolling that out this week. So it will be activated for you this week. So we're very excited about that. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your support. Love you. Also got the Patreon page. It's popping off over there. I'm posting all kinds of new content over there. I've got 2 new tiers, the $11 tier and the $20 tier. The $20 is the Paranormal Podcast, it's stand-up comedy, it's all kinds of stuff going on over there. That's like a breaking free from being specifically paranormal over there. That's got all kinds of good stuff going to be happening over there. So, and all of the podcasts will be available on YouTube moving forward. We're not going to do video exclusive here. I'm going to be posting all of the podcast episodes on YouTube from here on out. So thanks again. Thank you for your support. Give a follow on Instagram, Rising, Twitter, Rising, Crystallize app, TikTok, Ryan Singer Comedy. Check all that out. I'm out there making content for everybody. So hope you're having a good time. Hope you're enjoying yourself. I've got tour dates on ryansingercomedy.com coming in, plus other really fun shows in the works. And I'll keep you updated about my stand-up comedy special, The Supernatural, will be coming out sometime this year as well, along with a documentary about Post Town, which looks like it's going to be a series because it's getting good. I'll see you soon, and if I don't, I'll see you at the watering hole on the astral plane.